one of the kind of wise things that the tech industry could do is realize that we are part of nature as humans and find ways to help people reconnect and support the environment. I saw an example I really loved earlier this year. It was actually a student project by a guy called Tanai Wadodka. It's called Snow Seeds. And they are stickers that you attach to your skis or your snowboard that actually produce snow. So they use cloud seeding technology. So as you're kind of carving your way down the mountain, you're actually aiding further snowfall. And I think the key here as well is how you can integrate sustainability into people's existing routines. It's being able to kind of tie into someone's everyday in a way that benefits the environment, but doesn't feel like this huge sacrifice as well.
2025 has been a year of environmental drama. Fires, floods, droughts, earthquakes, and more making headlines around the globe. We can't ignore the effects of climate change, yet in a world where the economic realities hit hard for many individuals, their families and communities, sustainability is coming further down people's list of priorities. Our relationship with the planet is the focus of today's podcast. And to help me broach this topic, I'm joined by my colleagues Allyson Rees, Senior Lifestyle Strategist at WGSN, and Matt Zara, our Consumer Tech Strategist. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN, the world's leading trend forecasting company. And you're listening to Lives of Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast about how we live our lives in the future. Now, Allyson, you have been on this podcast many, many times, so lots of our listeners will know you, but for those who don't, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Allyson Rees. I'm a senior strategist on the Insight team. I cover lifestyle, which just runs the gamut of like wellness and travel and education. And I most recently did a report on wellness and climate change. I also did a report on loneliness and tackling the loneliness epidemic. So yeah, I'm really excited to speak to you both today.
Amazing. I was actually on stage in Lisbon yesterday talking about the loneliness epidemic using all your research. So thank you very much for that. And Matt, you've also been on the podcast before, maybe not quite as many times as Allyson, but can you introduce yourself?
I can, yeah. I am a strategist on our consumer tech team, and I'm based in London. And my job is all about helping clients navigate the ever-evolving world of tech, looking at what these new technologies mean for culture, for everyday people, as well as how they're going to impact the planet.
Okay, right. So I'm going to read you both a line from our Macro Strategies 2027 forecast and get a response from both of you. So we wrote, climate health equals public health. We will need to recognise that the challenges that are threatening us are also uniting us. So Matt, I'm going to come to you first. Give me your response to that forecast line.
I mean, I would agree completely. I think the thing about the climate crisis is it doesn't discriminate. Where you live, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, this is something that's going to impact every single one of us. And I think the sooner we realise this, the better, really. I think looking at it in terms of health is actually really helpful because it helps it make sense in people's lives. So the climate is something known as a hyperobject, which is this thing that is basically too big for our brains to comprehend. And this is a term that actually comes from a Bjork song, which I kind of love. But has since been adopted by climate psychologists. But I think by relating it back to health, it puts the climate in terms we all understand, and I think actually does a better job of motivating us to ultimately make a difference.
I think that there's a whole amount in this. And Bjork, we will trust, and I love the fact that line's been kind of adopted elsewhere. But if you think about it as something that happens elsewhere, and you think about it as something that's happening on your news screen, whether that's a TV, in the palm of your hand or whatever it is, it can feel very other. And it doesn't necessarily enact change because it's happening somewhere else. The reality is, especially this year, I would say, it hasn't been other. It has affected so many more people. But seeing it as something that is physically going to affect you makes it resonate a lot more. So I guess that's my response to what you've just said. Allyson, what's your response to that line?
I think, for a long time, you would see it on the news or it was in the distance, but now it's coming much more for people in their everyday lives and coming for their community. And because of that, people are much more aware of just like the knock-on effects of climate change, like the actual financial nuts and bolts of things. But I would say counter to what Matt said, like with climate change doesn't discriminate, like it doesn't, but it's not an equalizer. It's very much like the pandemic in that people are able to deal with it and roll with it in different ways. And, whether you have good insurance or you have even the ability to move, the amount of money you have really impacts how you deal with it. And that actually is something that is kind of polarizing people as they walk through this and deal with just like the effects of climate change.
You've got a very real life, example of that this year. Can you talk a little bit about how you saw the fires in Los Angeles affecting the communities around you?
Yeah, so I live just a few miles from like the burn areas in the Eaton fire. So in Altadena, I live in Pasadena, which is just right next door. But I have many friends and kind of family members that live in Altadena and have been, at very sort of varying levels of displacement. So like houses that burn down or the house next to them burned down, but their house still stands. So like they have their house, but they can't be there. They have to get like remediation, smoke damage. So and that has been really interesting and eye-opening because I've seen it within my own friends, people that had really good insurance, they're getting everything covered and, they're working with someone every single day to help them, whereas other people maybe they didn't have as good insurance. They're in a class action lawsuit and like suing their insurance company because of, not having proper coverage. And so it's really been eye-opening to see like the ways in which people deal with just disaster in their everyday lives and the way that some people kind of are they pick themselves up by their bootstraps and they're like I'm gonna get through this.
Hmm.
And then there are people who have left. They left on the day after the fire and they have not come back.
Wow.
Like I have friends that moved to San Francisco and they have not come back and they have not stepped foot in their home since the fires and
Wow.
it's just sitting there. I think one of the big conversations around this is like how this all affects kind of like your mental health as well and just the way that you go through the world. Like again, like my house is standing, in a lot of ways we weren't, affected physically by the fire,
Yeah.
but it's definitely had an impact on my husband and my mental health over the past year and like do we want to live here anymore? Do we want to
Mm.
live in California? It's, what is this the right decision for our family? It just really puts a lot of things into question.
Let's talk about strategies. So, coming back to WGSN's point of view on this, we're forecasting that brands are really going to need to utilize future proofing strategies that address the realities of living in a climate change world. Can you give some I guess practical examples of where brands are maybe stepping in and doing things that governments aren't or that the media isn't, to ensure that they have a positive future, that they are putting climate strategies in place that are going to positively affect the world around us, the people within that, and I guess at the end of the day, the brands themselves?
Yes. So one of the things that I've been seeing brands doing, which has been quite positive, is they're basically just creating more awareness to consumers, and they're trying to like arm them with information so that they can, yeah, have them make those informed decisions. Zillow is one that we've highlighted in our report. So Zillow is the kind of home. It's not necessarily a home buying app, but it's like a realty app where you can browse listings and make appointments for viewing a home. And they've basically started sharing data with First Street, which is a brand here in the United States that kind of shows consumers their expected climate risks over the next few years. So they're just saying, this is what your estimated insurance premium could be over the next few years. And you need to consider this ahead of your purchase because the price of your house might be one thing, but once you get the insurance that you need, like that's required for where this house is, this is
Yeah.
how much it will cost. So we're seeing more things like that where they're just brands are just kind of providing information, which I think is really important. And then on the other side of things, just in terms of the way that brands are rethinking lifestyles and the way that they interact with consumers is we're seeing this like emerging nighttime economy. And we've been reporting on this quite a bit. So like nighttime run clubs, night markets, because it's so hot and it will only just be getting hotter in the daytime how can you get people out at night so that they can still be together and socialize? So that's something we find quite interesting. We have like a dedicated report for that on WGSN. When I was doing my report, I did a report this summer called Future of Cities, and it dealt a lot in this and just how that cities themselves and municipalities are preparing for climate change. One of the big things we saw was like rethinking floating cities and like the cities of the future, just living on water and adapting to water levels. And this has been something that's been going on in like indigenous communities for generations. But now modern technology is sort of taking on these principles and proposing these floating cities as a way to be prepared for future floods and whatnot.
Okay, go on then, Matt. Your take on this topic.
Yeah, I think in my research, I found that there's this sort of acceptance from brands, really, that unless governments and businesses come together and pull off this huge collaboration, things aren't going to change overnight. So the shift really does move to kind of adaptation rather than mitigation. I think one of the examples I've seen which I really like already is in sort of fashion tech. So Beams, the Japanese clothing company, has already released this kind of lightweight jacket with a built-in fan. So already that kind of preparing for hotter climates. I think in terms of materials too, Nissan, the car company, is already trialing out cooling paint for its cars. So it's almost this acceptance that the world is going to change and we need to adapt with it. And I think, as Allyson says, as well as design, it's about our routines as well. Like we say, we covered the nocturnal economy, which is increasingly going to become a reality, going to be kind of working, sleeping, playing at night. And that's another area where I think tech will really need to support us with kind of the products and interventions for things like lack of vitamin D from the sun. There's a whole kind of untapped market there where people really need to get going.
It's every angle, isn't it? Which isn't surprising because it's how we live our lives and that is changed by the climate. But it's, it's what we put on our skin, it's how we dress ourselves, it's, how you future-proof your homes. I guess on that topic, certainly in the forecasting we're doing, climate change is reframing how we think about everything from sustainability through to public health and obviously the business strategies. Allyson, what are the points that you found in your research and the forecast that you're creating at the moment that kind of talk to that reframing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the biggest things is even just in our macro forecast for 2027, we talk about climate change. We use the term climate changed now. Just it's climate, it's happening. It's happened.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
we're living in it. I was really struck this year in March when I went to South by Southwest. I've been reporting on South by Southwest for years now. And it's always really they have a sustainability track and it's always kind of this big picture thinking with it. It's like, sustainable farming or how do we center nature in like business decisions? It's much more this sort of atomic like thinking. But I really noticed this year is like the conversation completely shifted and now it's all about climate resilience and it's very much like this is happening, how can we prevent this? How can we be proactive? Like it's all coming for us, so what do we need to do? Like we talked about fortified roofs way more than I ever thought we would ever be talking about at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
And so and that really struck me because it had always been this kind of more like systems change conversations rather than like the nuts and bolts of what people and brands need to be doing. That's been that was an interesting shift for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's becoming really practical because it's got to, right? It's not just this concept. We're
Yeah,
living
and
in it.
even like even sort of the idea of like the prepping economy and prepping in general that used to be very niche, very kind of like doomsday preppers, and now it's kind of like the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
The expectation is that everyone is preparing in some way.
Yeah, for me, I think the real reframing that I've seen is kind of in terms of storytelling. People have been, aware of the climate risks for a long time, but you need that better storytelling almost to get people to buy in. The best way to do that is almost this thing of kind of sustainability plus one. So, like in times of, economic hardship, it's natural that sustainability drops down that list of priorities. So, I think what you've got to do is highlight the additional benefits to sustainability beyond it just being the right thing to do.
Yeah.
which is where I think the climate health as public health thing is such a great angle to take, because it is so personal and will resonate with everybody.
How does the climate change narrative shift the macro forecasting from climate consciousness to acknowledging a fundamentally altered environment? And what does it mean for the future?
So the way that we talk about it on the site is that we need to have brands be working in two different ways. So they need to be working on the macro and the micro level. So like brands need to have these like really ambitious like moonshot goals for the sustainability. So, like for example, like Nike's Race to Zero, that's a good example. They're trying to get to zero carbon emissions and zero waste. But then at the same time, they also need to be working on the micro level, on the local level. So like how can Nike help make playgrounds cooler using sustainable materials? Like they have to be working both ways. So with an eye towards the future, but also in the here and now, and knowing that, this is climate change is happening every single day. I would also say that, stores that can operate as shelters or are able to deploy products, like there's that expectation, at least from consumers here in the US as well, that like they will be helping out in times of need. So, how do you disaster proof your supply chain? You need to be arming your local staff on a local level to actually be able to react to these things in real time as well.
Okay, and Matt, in the consumer tech world, what are the great examples there?
Yeah, I think the same rules apply really in terms of supply chain, particularly. I think it's about having that flexibility, and if you can, bringing your kind of sourcing and production close to home to protect against those shocks. I think, whether it's climate or political shocks, basically getting used to chaos as the norm and having a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and really kind of, having those ways out. I think for consumers, it's about helping people accept this new and actually sometimes quite uncomfortable reality. I think for companies, you should really be trying to ease this transition, make that shift as easy as possible, make people more comfortable, whether that's products that help them adapt or even just tackling these issues head on. Because I think it's really important as well to note that adaptation doesn't mean that we just give up on mitigation.
Yeah.
I think help people adjust to our new reality, but keep, like Allyson says, pursuing those moonshot projects as well.
Okay, so we're going to look to the future now and to understand what are the future proofing strategies that need to be put in place. Alison, you've talked very eloquently about the community that you've seen in the wake of the natural disasters near you, but we have got more taking place at the moment. We've got storms and hurricanes. We're actually just getting the aftermaths of one of the storms, and the aftermaths are nowhere near as bad as others experience them when you do have a hurricane coming across your island or, the coastal areas that you might live in. Can you talk a little bit about how communities have reacted this year or more recently and what that's going to mean for the future?
Yeah, so just from my personal experience and, the stories that I've heard about the Palisades fire as well, that has been really the silver lining of this entire experience is the ways in which people have come together and pooled resources and just really helped each other out. What we've really seen particularly in Los Angeles, which I think has just been so like characteristic of our city, is the ways that the film industry has really risen to the occasion. A great example of this is like location managers. So people who go out and scout locations for films and commercials and movies. Every time they do that, they take pictures of the locations, hundreds and hundreds of pictures. So they have an entire database of what homes all over Los Angeles look like. And so what they've done, and actually a very good friend of mine, his name is David Flannery, he was helping to head up this charge where they took all the photos that they have and they got in contact. They basically said, like, if a location manager has ever come to your house,
Yep.
contact this number and we can give you all of the photos so that you can claim every single thing in the photos for insurance.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's amazing. And we've seen a lot of things like that where, people have moved into new places. They don't have any furniture because all of their furniture has been burned. And so we have prop houses saying, "Here, take this furniture. We have this overstock. Take this furniture, use it." So like people have like couches from like the Wicked movie in their house. And so it's kind of fun. And then, during the prom season at the end of the school year last year, all of the costume designers, makeup artists all came together to basically give like dresses and tuxedos and hair and makeup to all of these kids that have been displaced. So like, you know, it's funny, I'm kind of doing the thing I said in the beginning of the podcast not to do, which is like, not talk about these sort of like flowery things, but it really is heartwarming.
Yeah.
And it really is amazing to see the community come together because LA is such a city of like doers with the film
Yeah.
industry. I think the biggest thing that I think people don't realize with these losses, with these climate disasters, is just the third spaces that are lost. All of a sudden, so like my coffee shop burned down, that many schools burned down, tennis clubs, hiking trails, all of these things where people gather, they're just gone. And everyone is dealing with this sort of grief. And so, like, if you don't have a place to go. And so that has been really important. The brands that have really bootstrapped their way to make these third spaces for people to come together has been really important. There's a bar right around the corner for me called Good Neighbor Bar, and they've just like made it their mission over the past year to create a space where people can gather. And so they built like a children's play area. It's a bar, they have food trucks, and it's just a place where people can come together again because all of these people have now either left Los Angeles or scattered all
Yeah.
over LA County. And now we have like a place, a handful of places where we can come back together and be together. And that is so important.
In the future, how do you expect or suggest that brands align their product and their service and their strategies with these growing consumer expectations, which are coming out of the world that they're living in right now?
There definitely is, at least here in the States, the expectation that brands should help and should kind of, obviously they are changing their supply chains and changing the way they do work to fight climate change, but they also need to be there when climate change and climate disaster happens. And that expectation definitely is there. Brands, they have the ability, especially I'm thinking about like big box retailers, these brands that are operating also kind of as a lot as third spaces in a lot of places
Yeah.
in the United
Yeah.
States. And we're seeing more and more that they're taking this on. So, Target is a really good example. They've deployed a lot of help after Hurricane Ian a few years ago. If you are a brand that's already operating in a space that just happens to be a place with a lot of climate disaster, I'm thinking about like Florida, and Disney is a really good example of this. They will always assist or they will, I should say, they will very often assist their team members affected by climate change. They've also created a lot of housing for their team members so that if disaster happens, they can automatically have housing for them to stay in, for them to be with their families. So
Wow.
there is something that every brand can do to sort of provide that empathy and provide that peace of mind for consumers.
Yeah. Matt, what's the European take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously in the UK, I don't know if there's that same expectation that brands will help out, but I'm sure people would love them to. I guess we're also lucky in the sense that we don't experience as many extreme weather events as the US, but that's for now. Like things are going to change, and there are plenty of parts of the country that experience, severe flooding, for instance. But I think one thing I've seen brands in the UK do, I guess, is this kind of joint messaging between the climate crisis and cost of living, because that's obviously something very high on the agenda. So companies like Octopus, the energy company, will often frame things in terms of how your household can save money, but they're also very big on solar and like green energy. So there's the environmental angle there too. I've also seen really good campaigns from companies like Back Market and Which, all about kind of slowing down this endless churn of new tech devices. So again, like framing this from a money saving angle as well as sustainability.
We're talking about tomorrow, and of course, tech is always going to be a huge part of that. Are there any examples of kind of wise tech that's working with nature, not against it, that can help us when we're talking about a climate changed world?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the kind of wise things that the tech industry could do is realize that we are part of nature as humans and find ways to help people reconnect and support the environment. I saw an example I really loved earlier this year. It was actually a student project by a guy called Tanai Wadodka. It's called Snow Seeds. And they are stickers that you attach to your skis or your snowboard that actually produce snow. So they use cloud seeding technology. So as you're kind of carving your way down the mountain, you're actually aiding further snowfall. So
Wow.
I'm
That's
well aware.
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it blew my mind slightly. I'm well aware it's not this perfect solution to the problem, but I really love the concept and how it kind of encourages us to push that thinking further. And I think the key here as well is how you can integrate sustainability into people's existing routines. It's being able to kind of tie into someone's everyday in a way that benefits the environment, but doesn't feel like this huge sacrifice as well. So I think that's a really wise way of going about it, basically.
Yeah. I think, the takeaway for me from a lot of this conversation is this is the state of the world now. Consumers are distracted, impacted by all sorts of other things that are going on in the world. They can't ignore what's happening from a climate perspective because it's affecting them personally. And if it isn't affecting them personally, it's probably not too many degrees away. And if it's not even that, then it is all over your screens. But the community aspect as well is important. And you do always see this where there is a kind of gap created because maybe government or big business aren't being able to fulfill obligations or don't feel it's their place to, but communities often rise up and fill that space. And actually, that's where a lot of innovation takes place as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's always my last question. Allyson, I'll come to you first. Are you more anxious or excited? Maybe excited isn't the right word. Anxious or positive about the future?
I'm anxious.
Mm.
2026 is going to be a big year, especially here in the States. But at the same time, we also have like the World Cup and a lot of things to look forward to. So right now, I'm going to try to focus on the here and now. My therapist says I should focus on the here and now more, and it's hard to do in my job. But
Yes.
yeah, so I'm just really going to lean into the holidays this year and just like focus on joy and being with friends and family. So yeah.
Focus on joy. That's lovely. Matt, are you going to be focusing on joy?
In an anxious way. I'm with Alison on the here and now thing. I completed a course in eco psychology earlier this year, and a big part of that was kind of coping with climate anxiety. And like Alison says, pretty good advice for just any anxiety. Try and focus on the here and now. What can you do today to push things in the right direction? And then hopefully our forecasts are a pretty good place to start.
Big thank you to Allyson and Matt. Please check out our other podcast, Create Tomorrow, with my amazing colleague, Cassandra Napoli. But that's it for me for now. I'll return with a new episode of Lives of Tomorrow in 2 weeks' time. My name's Carla Buzasi. I'm the CEO of WGSN, and I'll see you next time.